Hi everyone, Christina here. Today I wanted to show you a watercolor envelope. I showed this image on Instagram this last week. It was some envelopes I was preparing to send for Valentine's Day, and I got quite a bit of response and many requests asking to share how I made these envelopes, or the one that says Heidi. So I thought I would walk you through that today. So the first thing you need is some really good watercolor paper, but it has to be thin enough to make an envelope out of it. So I have a couple different thinner watercolor papers that I've tried. This is one that I've showed you guys in the past, and it's an okay watercolor paper, but I think I prefer this other one from Canson better. And this is because it just seems to take the water a little bit more. And for this particular technique that I'm going to show you, it does require a lot of water. So a really good watercolor paper is best for this envelope. So I'm just going to tear out a sheet here, and I'm going to cut it down to 8 by 8. I'm going to be creating an A2 envelope with my envelope punch board. I just wrote down the measurements on the punch board right there, you can see, because this is the envelope the size that I make the most. So 8 by 8, and then I'm sliding it in and lining it up on the 3.5 mark up there in the top left corner, punching and then scoring, and then I'm going to line it, that score line, with that little teal pointed piece, or you can line it up on the ruler edge up to the 4.5 mark. Either one. So it's 3.5 and then 4.5, and then make sure you punch and score for each turn. And I discovered that if I actually go by the measurements instead of by matching up the score line, that I get a better envelope. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because sometimes the seeing the score line can be a little bit off, but I use the measurements more than the score lines. So now I'm going to be using some masking fluid. This is thin line masking fluid, and I've discovered that whenever I open up the bottle, there's a little bit of air in the tip. So I like to sort of practice on some scratch paper before I go to my project. So I'm going to write the name Jennifer in this masking fluid, and I'm not going to pencil it in beforehand or not. I just discovered that it was easy just to go straight on there and start applying the masking fluid. If you have never done this before, or you're nervous about going straight onto the envelope, you can for sure use a pencil and kind of mark in the area where you want. You'll just want to be sure to erase the pencil lines very carefully around the masking fluid before adding your watercolor. That's because sometimes watercolor can trap the pencil on the paper, and you want to make sure that that pencil's as most removed before you move on. So the way I did that lettering style was, after I initially drew on the letters, I went back through and thickened up those strokes that would be downward strokes. So if you think about when you're writing the letters, every time you have that downward motion, that's where you would add more masking fluid to thicken that line. I showed you this technique on my faux calligraphy for your envelopes video. I'll put a link to that up here in the top corner, just so you can see another example of how exactly you determine which lines to thicken up. So once again, I'm adding the thicker lines to the downward strokes. And this masking fluid is actually pretty forgiving on this. It lets you round out all of those lines and make sure that you can get a really smooth transition between those thicks and thins. So I set this aside to dry for about 10 to 15 minutes. And I also made sure to close the cap on that masking fluid really, really well. So after 10 or 15 minutes, I was ready to start the watercoloring. I'm using some Distress Ink mini ink pads. You could use any type of watercolor medium that you'd like. You could use regular watercolors or Peerless watercolors, whatever you'd like to use. Today I'm using 3 colors. They are Tumbled Glass, Peacock Feathers, and Pine Needles. And I'm going to be adding a little bit of water on a watercolor brush and then bringing it over to my project. So I first started by wetting the front of the envelope with some water, and I'm just using a wide watercolor brush for this. And I just want to make sure I have this area wet down. I don't want it too wet, but I do want it wet. So I'm speeding up the video so it doesn't take quite as long. And I'm just really easily adding in some color. There's really no thought about this, especially if you use kind of these colors that go from light to dark. If you use more colors that are very, very different. You really have to think about how the colors are going to mix because you don't want to put like purple and yellow next to each other because that would make an ugly gray color. But for the most part, you can just add whatever colors you'd like and the colors will start to mix because you've added water to the paper before you added the color. By doing that, it encourages the color to move around. So I took a paper towel and just sopped up some of the water around the edges just to help it from kind of bleeding back into the center area. And then I took my heat tool and dried the entire area. You don't have to use the heat tool for this. You could definitely just let it dry on your work surface here. And I also wanted to mention that I did not tape down this envelope to a board, mostly just because I knew I would be picking it up rather quickly and it didn't matter to me. But if you wanted to, and to prevent it from kind of warping, the paper warping, you could definitely tape it down to a board. So after the watercolor is completely dry, you can use your fingertips to rub away that masking fluid and it reveals the white paper underneath. I'm going to do one additional step, and that is add in some water droplets. You guys, if you're familiar with my videos, have seen me use this technique quite a bit. I think it looks fantastic with Distress ink. You can do water droplets like this with regular watercolor, but it doesn't have as dramatic of an effect as it does with Distress ink. And that's because Distress ink is formulated to reactivate when moisture is added. So when you add water, it starts to pull away that color from the paper, and then you can pick up that color with your paper towel, and it almost is like it bleaches the watercolor paper. It's really, really cool. So I would suggest doing this with Distress inks. Maybe not so much with the watercolors, but you could definitely try and see if you like the effect. So I'm going to dry this one more time. And this is essentially the design of the envelope. I'm going to walk you through how to assemble the envelope or glue it together just because I've discovered a way that I really like to work with it. So first I folded up the corners and really pressed down those folds with my bone folder. Then I took some Express, I think it's Express It maybe even, I'm not sure, I think it's Express It adhesive tape. I got this in my bag at CHA back in January, but it's very similar to score tape or any other red line tape, something like that. It's basically just a really, really sticky tape. So I put it on the bottom flap and then fold it up, making sure not to take it all the way to the corner. And then I have my envelope. So it's a little bit warped right now because that watercolor paper got warped when I was watercoloring. But as soon as you put in a card, especially one that has some thick cardstock on it, it will hold the envelope in place so that it's more flat. So you can see that really flattens it out. So I'm also going to add some postage stamps, and this is my pack of postage stamps. I have quite the collection, but that's because I just love putting on postage stamps that match my envelope designs. So today I'm using a couple different smaller denomination stamps, and I've got like one that's 26 cents, I think it's mainly for postcards, and then I got one that's 34 cents, I think that's for postcards as well. I've just been collecting these for a while. And then I have this vintage stamp that is 5 cents, and I just love that really pretty green color on it. So I use this that particular stamp quite a bit. So normally I would put the address right below the name, but since I am going to use this envelope and I don't want to broadcast Jennifer's address all over the internet, I'm going to leave it blank for now. So that's what the envelope looks like all finished. I did do a similar design earlier this week for my friend Jana, and I've blurred out her address so it's not on blast on the internet. And here is the Jennifer envelope once again. I think this is a really fun technique. You could definitely use like some die cut letters or draw on some letters really carefully and then fill in with masking fluid. It's definitely up to you how you want to do it. And you can do some really, really pretty, beautiful watercolor textures on your envelopes. And it makes the envelope more special for the people you're sending it to. So thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.